In 2019, my aunt inherited $180,000 from my grandfather. By 2023, she had about $12,000 left, and she genuinely couldn't tell you where the rest went. Not a bad investment, not a scam, just groceries, upgraded cars, a kitchen remodel, a few vacations, and 1,000 small decisions that felt reasonable in the moment. That's not a story about my aunt being irresponsible. That's the story of what happens to most inherited money in America, and by the end of this video you'll understand exactly why. Quick heads up, this is educational, not personalized financial advice, just so we're clear before we get into it. But stick around, because by minute 15 you're going to know the exact three-part system that keeps money from disappearing the way my aunts did, and it works whether you're starting with $180,000 or $18. By the end of this video, you'll understand what generational wealth actually is, why it almost never survives past the second generation, and what you can start doing this week regardless of your income to be the person who breaks that pattern in your family. Here's the myth. Most people think generational wealth means being born rich. Trust fund, mansion, the whole thing. So if that's not your family, you assume this conversation doesn't apply to you. That's backwards. Generational wealth isn't an amount of money. It's a system that survives the person who built it. And the data on this is almost brutal. Researchers have tracked this for decades, and the pattern is depressingly consistent. About 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the end of the second generation. By the third generation, that number climbs to around 90%. Read that again. 90% of family wealth is gone within 3 generations, regardless of how much there was to begin with. So the question was never, how do I get rich? The question is, how do I build something that survives me? This is Money Axis. Let's get into it. Section 1. What generational wealth actually is. Generational wealth is not a lump sum. It's a machine that keeps producing value after the person who built it is gone. A $500,000 inheritance is not generational wealth. It's just money, and money without a system around it behaves exactly like my aunt's $180,000. It gets absorbed into a lifestyle and disappears. Real generational wealth has 3 components working together: appreciating assets, cash-flowing assets, and transferred knowledge. Miss any one of the 3 and the whole thing collapses eventually. Most families that lose their money didn't lack the first 2. They lacked the third. Think about it like a farm. The land and the crops are the money. But if nobody teaches the next generation how to farm, they'll either sell the land for cash or run it into the ground within a few seasons. The knowledge is the actual asset. The money is just what the knowledge produces. Section 2. The Wealth Transfer Death Spiral. Now here's where most financial advice gets this completely backwards. Everyone focuses on how to get money to the next generation faster: trusts, tax strategies, estate planning. Almost nobody focuses on why that money evaporates once it arrives. You can have the most airtight trust in the world, and it won't matter if the person receiving the money has never had to build a budget in their life. Here's the typical spiral. Generation 1 builds the wealth through some combination of grinding, risk-taking, and forced discipline because they had no cushion. They had to be careful. Generation 2 grows up with the cushion already there. They didn't build the discipline because they never needed it to survive. Generation 3 inherits the assets with zero context for what it took to create them, and treats it like found money. A concrete example. Say your family builds a $600,000 net worth by retirement, split between a paid-off house and some investment accounts. If that gets split between 2 kids with no framework for managing it, each person gets about $300,000. Without any structure, the average American household with a windfall like that spends it down to near zero within about 5 years, according to multiple studies on lottery winners and inheritance recipients. Same math, different starting number, same outcome as my aunt. Section 3. The 3-bucket system. This is the part that actually fixes the spiral. Instead of thinking about wealth as one big pile of money, split it into 3 functional buckets, and teach every person in your family what each bucket is for. Bucket 1 is the growth bucket. Assets you never touch that just compound. Index funds, retirement accounts, real estate you're not living in. This bucket's entire job is to sit there and grow for decades. If you put $400 a month into an index fund averaging a historical 8% return, In 25 years, that's roughly $380,000, most of it from growth, not from what you put in. But none of that matters if you skip the mistake I'm about to show you in the next section, because I've seen families build the growth bucket perfectly and still lose everything within one generation. Bucket 2 is the income bucket. Assets that produce cash flow you can actually use. Rental property, dividend stocks, a small business. This is what pays for life without draining bucket 1. And bucket 3 is the knowledge bucket, which isn't money at all, it's the actual habits, conversations, and financial literacy you pass down. This is the bucket almost every family skips, and it's the one that determines whether buckets 1 and 2 survive contact with the next generation. Section 4. Starting the growth bucket with almost nothing. Here's the part people get wrong. They think you need a windfall to start bucket 1. You don't. You need consistency and time is the one resource that actually favors you if you're in your 20s or 30s right now. Say you open a Roth IRA and put in $150 a month starting at 25. By 65, assuming a conservative 7% average annual return, that's a little over $380,000, and you only contributed about $72,000 of your own money across those 40 years. The rest is compounding, doing the work while you were living your life. A lot of people building this bucket use a low-cost brokerage to automate it. Something like Webull lets you set up recurring investments into an index fund so the money moves before you ever get a chance to spend it, which matters more than the platform itself. The mechanism that works is automation, removing the decision entirely, not any particular app. This next part is the one thing that separates people who actually build generational wealth from people who just talk about it at Thanksgiving. Section 5. The income bucket and why most people skip it. The growth bucket is passive. The income bucket requires you to actually own something that produces cash while you're alive to manage it, because this is where you practice the skills you're eventually going to teach. A rental property, a dividend portfolio that pays out quarterly, even a small side business, the goal isn't the income itself. It's building the muscle of managing an asset. Here's a real-shaped example. A duplex bought for $220,000 with 20% down, rented at $2,400 a month combined, might net you $400 to $600 a month after the mortgage, taxes, and maintenance. Not life-changing money, but it's teaching you cash flow management, tenant issues, and maintenance budgeting. Those are exactly the skills your kids will need to manage whatever you eventually hand them. This is also where most people quietly opt out because it's harder than just buying index funds and forgetting about it. But the family that has someone in the income bucket actively managing something is the family that has someone capable of stepping in and running things when generation 1 is gone. Section 6. The knowledge bucket. Passing down the system, not just the money. And that's when I found out the number everyone told me was wrong. I used to think the goal was leaving my future kids as much money as possible. Turns out the families who actually keep wealth across generations aren't the ones who left the biggest number. They're the ones who ran actual money conversations at the dinner table. Studies on multigenerational wealth consistently point to the same variable. Families that talk openly about money, how it was made, how decisions get made, what mistakes were made, retain wealth at dramatically higher rates than families that treat money as a private, awkward topic. It's not the size of the estate. It's whether the next generation understood the system well enough to keep running it. Practically, this means things like involving teenagers in real budget conversations, letting a 20-year-old sit in on a discussion about the family's investment accounts, or writing down literally on paper the reasoning behind financial decisions so it doesn't die with you. None of this costs money. All of it is the difference between your bucket 1 and bucket 2 surviving past you or evaporating as my aunt's inheritance did. Here's the thing nobody tells you, and it's the actual point of this entire video. Generational wealth was never primarily a money problem. It's an information problem. The families that keep their wealth aren't smarter about the stock market or luckier about real estate. They just refuse to let financial knowledge die with one person. Think back to my aunt. My grandfather had the money. He also had 40 years of hard-earned instincts about spending, saving, and risk that never got transferred to anyone. He just left the money and assumed it would be obvious. It wasn't. The $180,000 was never the asset. The 40 years of judgment behind it was the asset, and it walked out the door with him. So if you take one thing from this video, take this: you don't need to wait until you're wealthy to start building generational wealth. You start the moment you start narrating your financial decisions out loud to the people who are going to inherit whatever you build, because the habit of explaining why is worth more than any account balance you'll ever hand them. The recap: generational wealth is a system, not a lump sum of money that disappears in one generation without structure. 70 to 90% of family wealth vanishes within 2 to 3 generations because knowledge doesn't get passed down with it. Build 3 buckets: growth assets you never touch, income assets you actively manage, and knowledge you deliberately transfer. And the real asset was never the balance, it's the judgment behind it, and that only survives if you actually talk about it. If you're serious about starting bucket 1 this week, comment the dollar amount you're going to automate into an investment account before the end of the month, even if it's $25. I read every one of these, and putting a real number in writing is the first step that actually separates people who build this from people who watch videos about it. If this made you rethink how your family handles money, the next video breaks down the exact account structure I'd set up if I were starting completely from zero at 25, and that's the next access point.